This chair slopes down because it was my grandfather's rocking chair, which is not ideal for a video, but alas, I'll have to manage. Hi, welcome back. Am I with a new background once again? Yes, I am, because we are once again in lockdown, so I'm stuck here. So this is going to be my background for quite a while. I hope it's not too distracting or awfully chaotic. Today I wanted to do something a little different, and I wanted to recommend you some of my favorite books that you probably never heard of. What I mean is, I'm going to take some of my favorite books that I never heard anyone talk about on BookTube, and I'm going to recommend them to you. And I made sure that all of these are translated into English, so there's a chance that you can maybe get them. Because sometimes I recommend Italian books that I really like, and people are like, yeah, those look great, but they're only in Italian, so how am I going to read it? So I got you. Okay, I want to start with something that fan of the genre will probably recognize, because I think there's a movie or a TV show adaptation of this, but this is Bleeding Edge by Thomas Pynchon. This was one of the weirdest novels that I ever read. How do I describe this? If you think of the meaning of the word funky and cyberpunk, this book is cyberpunk as hell. I'm going to read from the back because it has been a while since I've read this, but it is still stuck in my mind for how cool this was and how the writing stuck out to me. So the year is 2001, and we are in New York City. Fraud investigator Maxine Tarnow, she's so cool, she's such a badass, is on a case for billionaire geek CEO Gabriel Ice. Standing in her way is an array of bloggers, hackers, code monkeys, and entrepreneurs, some of whom begin to show up mysteriously dead. And so she has to sort of work the network, but also do some real heavy-handed investigating to get to the perpetrators. This is one of the coolest and weirdest books that I've ever read, and I think everybody who loves a good thriller, but also who likes funky music, would love this book, a lot. Next is one of my favorite books ever, and that one of the books that really shaped my childhood as it was, and I sought out comfort from this book for almost every day. I reread this book to death when I was a kid, and it made me feel so special. This is, in Italian, Cornelia e le strabilianti storie delle sorelle Somerset by Leslie M. Bloom. The original title is Cornelia and the Audacious Escapades of the Somerset Sisters. You follow a young girl called Cornelia, and she feels like she's kind of an outcast. Her favorite pastime is to read new words from the dictionary, and she loves words, so she loves languages. And she feels really like an outsider also in her own family. And then she discovers that there's a new neighbor coming into her apartment complex, and she befriends this really old lady who has a super lovable butler. And this old lady starts to tell her all the audacious escapades that she used to do with her sisters. They used to travel the world and go on all sorts of adventures, and it's so charming and sweet, and it makes you feel right at home if you're a reader, because the protagonist is also a reader, but in a very cute and not done before way. I think this is the perfect gift for a kid to read, to get them into reading, because it was so charming, so sweet, so, I don't know, I feel so happy when talking about this book because it made me feel so happy. So I hope it makes somebody else happy too. You must know that I used to read almost only in Italian when I was a kid because I was still learning the language. And then this series happened, and only the first book got translated into Italian, and I was so distraught that I urged my father, who lives abroad, to buy me all the other books in English, and I began reading in English almost only because of the series, and then I went on. And it helped me a lot with the language because I learned so many other words, and this series kept me up all night. And it's one of the best. And I love all the characters. Okay, I'm just gonna say, it's the Lockwood & Co. series by Jonathan Stroud. You probably heard of this if you're like into the more middle grade side of booktube, but still, I want to recommend this, even though you've probably like seen the title somewhere. Jonathan Stroud also wrote the Bartimaeus series, which is one of the best like new fantasy series that I've read in a while. Not new fantasy, but it's a newer kind of fantasy. It was so cool, so funny. We follow a more steampunk version of London in which there has been an epidemic of ghosts. So you're not infested by maybe rats or gnats, you're infested by ghosts. And the society has discovered that only kids can actually see and get rid of these ghosts. So they form like corporations that go and disinfest the place. And Lockwood & Co. is the tiniest ghost hunting shop that there is. And you follow all their adventures when they're trying to figure out lots of different infestations in all of the series, but then there's an overarching mystery. And the characters are amazing. The character growth is done so unbearably well. There's also, I think it's more in the last books, there's also a sapphic romance that made me so happy, so incredibly happy that this was a middle grade series with a sapphic romance. And I don't know, I just love this series so much. I was so addicted to it, and it's fast paced, it's perfect when you're feeling down because it's funny as hell. Jonathan Stroud has a way with funny words. Perfect. Okay, now for a more advanced kind of reader, I think, because the writing in these books are kind of like complicated, but it's so worth it. So I'm showing you this, but what I mean is everything Walter Morse has ever written. This is Il Labirinto dei Libri Sognanti, which is the sequel to another book. I'm going to put like the titles in English here because I think the original is in German. I think, yeah, in German. He does kind of weird, I don't know if I can even call it fantasy because it's such a weird genre, like a genre on its own. This book right here, you follow a sort of dragon. You can see him in the cover. And there is this society that is based on books and writing, and books are a commodity, but also they make homes. Like they used to stack books to make homes and like manors, and use them as currencies. There are bounty hunters that search for rare books. You follow the story of this dragon that is writing about him writing one of the most famous books that is going to become in the future. So he writes about him and what got him to write about this book. But there's also this kind of essence or trance that every writer seeks. And it's like when you get in the perfect mood for writing and you write a masterpiece that is going to be remembered for ages. And so he gets to that point and he writes about his journey going to this really big city that is all made of books, and he finds a labyrinth made of rare books underneath the city. And he also talks about, like, there are made-up books inside this one, so he talks about them, but there's also like beautiful illustration all throughout these books, and it's, I don't know, the most imaginative kind of like this is the most imaginative book that I've ever read, and for a while it was my favorite book of all time. And then my friends who love horror, but also like not the kind of disgusting sort of horror, like not body horror or gore, and love short stories that are maybe interconnected, may I present these authors. It's a whole like collection that I've got here. My favorite author is Chris Priestley, who wrote all these 3 collection of short stories that are all interconnected. So there's usually like an old man recounting to little kids these stories that are so macabre, so creepy, so spooky, and they're so short, so it's perfect. But they're great if you want like a quick horror read. These are the best. But also in the same like genre of these 3, there's also another writer who's called Leondardini. All chapters come with beautiful like ink illustrations and they're awesome. The original titles of this is Hazel Phantasmagoria. The original title of this was Tunnel's Mouth. This was definitely the creepiest out of all of this. The original title of this one, which is my personal favorite, I think this is the one that it's best like read first, is Uncle's Montague's Tales of Terror. This is like the coolest edition that I have. It's called Tales of Terror from the Black Ship, which is the one that terrified me the most because I'm scared of the open ocean and deals a lot with shipwrecks. So yeah. And then the last book, and I'm going to shout out my favorite book of all time that came after the Walter Moore's one, is going to be The Grey House by Marion Petrosian. My favorite book of all time. I think about this book all the time, and I have a story connected with this book. I don't know if I ever told you, but there's a story. So I saw this book, which was a behemoth at the time for me. I was a little kid. It was like this big. And I saw it and I was like, this is the biggest book I've ever like seen in the library. And then I didn't buy it. I bought another book. And then I lost all sight of that book for like 2 weeks. And then I went back into that same library that no longer exists, which makes me really sad. And I saw it and I was like, this is destiny, I have to read it. So I started it. And then I couldn't understand what was going on because I was like, I think I was too little to comprehend what was going on. This deals a lot with reality, but with a pinch of magic that makes it all the more like fantastical. So then I paused my reading for 5 years and then I reread it and I loved it so much, and I reread it again and I made charts for the characters, which I've never done for any books ever aside from this one. So the story begins with a house in which all disabled kids go to pass the summer if the parents can't actually take care of them. It's like a school, so they go to school, there's a dormitory, but inside this house, and at first you don't actually know if it's the kids' imagination or if it's actually happening. Like the rooms transform and they are made into a battlefield, or like a field, like an open field where the kids can go play, or they can go to war and like start factions and campaign against each other, and everybody calls each other by nicknames that represent something like truly deep and dark inside themselves. So the main protagonist is called the Smoker because once he was caught smoking and then that stuck with him, and it becomes like a characteristics of this kid who I think was in a wheelchair, and it was so cool. It took Marion Petrosian 10 years to write this, and it's actually, I think, like 3 or 5 books condensed into one. I still don't understand everything about the story. I'm going to read it pretty soon because I think it deserves it. It deserves a reread. It's such a great book. Oh my god. It was also my first introduction to people who were disabled as main characters. Like, I think all the characters had a disability, and it was incredible to like read about these kids. And it was not a story about grief about them being disabled. It was a story about them like starting wars and doing magical things and like trying to kill each other at some points, trying to befriend each other. It's about love, it's about friendship. It's so cool. And I think everybody should give this book a chance, even though I don't think it's for everybody, and I can understand if someone doesn't like it. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's it's the greatest book that I've ever read. No doubts. I hope I've convinced you to try at least one of these books because they're my favorites and I never see anyone talk about them, which is pretty sad. If you've read any of these, please let me know in the comments, or like let me know if you're going to try any of them. And if you try them, please let me know if you like them or not, because I'm really nosy like that. You've reached the end, so as always, please check out the links that are down below. There are some very important like petitions and places where you can donate, especially in these trying times for a lot of different communities. They're down below. It takes a second, like just do it. Also, socials, I have them, they're down below. If you want to connect with me, I'm always on Twitter, I always respond. It's a lot of fun memes and games down there. It's fun, just go there. If you want to know what I'm reading, I have a Goodreads account, so I'm going to link it also down below. I also have an Amazon wishlist, even though I don't use Amazon, I use it to check the prices. But if you want to know what I plan on buying, it's also down below, alongside with everything that is important. So yeah, this is the end. I hope you'll tune in next time for my next video, and goodbye!